So, one of the questions that Muslims love to ask Christians and debate with them on is, where in the Bible does Jesus say, I am God, worship me? Knowing that there is no verse in the Bible that says exactly that word for word. So, just because someone asked you a question doesn't mean that you should jump in and try to answer it. Jesus used this technique quite a bit in the Gospels whenever someone would ask him a question to try to test him. And instead of providing an answer, Jesus would reverse and go back with a question instead. So if someone were to come to me and ask me that question, I would reverse back and I would ask them a question like, for example, does that mean that you believe in the authority of the Bible as the written word of God, that if I show you where Jesus says that in the Bible, you would believe that he is God? Of course, we all know that that answer would be a no. Another question I could or would go back with is that the only way that you would believe that Jesus is God and worship him? And if the person says yes, I have to see where Jesus says he is God, otherwise I will not believe that he is God. If he says that, then I would point him to his own Quran, because in the Quran, in chapter 79 of the Quran, in verse 24, Surat An-Nazi'at in the Quran, the Pharaoh of Egypt says to Moses, I am your Lord, the Most High. He says it exactly like this, literally. However, we all know that Moses didn't fall down on his face in front of Pharaoh and worshipped Pharaoh. And we all know today, of course, that Muslims do not worship the Pharaoh of Egypt. So here we have it. Someone who made an open claim that he is God, the Most High, and yet Muslims do not worship him today. So obviously that is not the only way that someone can claim to be God. In fact, it's not a way at all that someone can claim to be God. To be God, one doesn't need to claim to be God. He needs to prove that he is God. To be God, one actually should not claim to be God, but rather prove through works that he is God. Another question I would ask back to that person would be, where in the Quran does the Prophet of Islam say, I am a prophet or the prophet of God, follow me? Where does he say that? There is no such verse in the Quran. And yet, Muslims today follow their prophet and believe that he was sent from God, and they follow all of his commandments. So here we have it, another example of someone who did not say that he is the prophet of God, follow me, just like they require of Jesus to say, and yet they believe in him and they follow him. Another hypothetical example or hypothetical question I would throw back at the person asking me would be something like this. If I were to come to you today and claim to be God and say, I am God, worship me, would you worship me? Of course, the answer to that silly hypothetical question is a resounding no. So saying that I am God, or for Jesus to say that I am God, worship me, means absolutely nothing. However, if you want to provide a biblical answer, you can. You can refer the person asking you the question to the Gospel of John, chapter 10 and verse 30, in which Jesus says, I and the Father are one. And just so we're clear on what that means, the Jews of his day understood the significance of that statement. That's why if you read the subsequent verses, they picked up stones and they wanted to stone him. And when Jesus asked him why they wanted to stone him, their answer was, it is not for a good work that we are going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. So it's very clear here what that meant to them. And because Jesus understood that not words that matter, but works, he replied back to them later in the same chapter, a couple of verses down, and he said, "If I am not doing the works of my Father, then do not believe me. But if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father." So Jesus made a claim of deity very clearly. And when they wanted to stone him, he didn't back down on what he said. He didn't retract what he said. As a matter of fact, he doubled down on it. And he said that he is in the Father and the Father is in him because of the works that he does. Another place you can provide a biblical answer from is where Jesus himself claims to be Master and Lord. And you will find that in, again, the Gospel of John, chapter 13 and verse 13. Jesus says to his disciples, "You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am." And note that the word Lord here in Greek is Kyrios, and Kyrios is the Old Testament name of the God of the Old Testament that is equivalent to his Hebrew name. So Jesus here was saying that he is Lord using the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew name of the God of the Old Testament. And there is several other places you can go to. I'll give you just a couple of examples here, just to, be clear. Philip, in John chapter 14, asked Jesus to show them the Father. And Jesus' answer was, "Have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." So again, this is a clear instance where Jesus is claiming to be equal with the Father. And lastly, I would give you another example that I think may be even stronger in John chapter 5, verses 16 and 18. And this, the Bible, I'm reading here from John chapter 5. "And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, 'My Father is working until now, and I am working.' This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God." So very clear examples here of where we see that the Jews of Jesus' day knew and understood that he was unequivocally and unambiguously making himself equal with God the Father, and thus making himself God. And finally, you can also direct whoever is asking you a question to a couple of other examples where other people testified to Jesus that he is the Son of God. And one of those examples you will find in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16 and verse 15 and 17, where Peter confessed to Jesus that he was the Son of God. Jesus was asking his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And Peter confessed that he was the Son of the living God. So what was Jesus' reaction? He actually commended Peter for that confession, saying that it's not flesh and blood that revealed that to him, but it was his God, his Father in heaven. Finally, another example, very clear example of where Jesus was called Lord and God. And you'll find that in the story of Jesus and Thomas, where Thomas could not believe or did not want to believe that Jesus had risen from the dead. And you will find that in John chapter 20, where Thomas calls Jesus my Lord and my God. I hope this short answer was helpful to answer that question. But again, you could use the same logic of the person asking you the question to reveal and expose the flawed logic of his own question. Thank you.